Hello and well met, folks. This is Laren with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. So, to kind of continue the series that I've been working on from episodes 1 to 5, now we finally have the Lost Mine of Phandelver, the Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk, excuse me. So, I want to say that, I was really excited about this release. I did my research. I went and looked at all of the different things that were going to be offered. And I'm going to say that I kind of got mixed emotions about it. So I like the fact that they try to include it in the adventure. That's cool. But the thing about it is that they did rewrite a lot of it in the beginnings for the Lost Mine of Phandelver part. And I want to say that, it really is two adventures, and it's kind of like stacked on top of each other. So I wasn't really happy with the way they incorporated both of them together. It's really hard to justify, after the long Lost Mine of Phandelver episode, where they have to liberate the mines and such. When they go back to Phandelver, it's kind of in the throes of being corrupted. And then you have to figure out what's causing it, and then you're going into another adventure. So yes, it's localized to the Phandelver and that area, but it seemed like kind of disjointed. And I've watched other streamers and YouTubers, and they kind of had the same feeling that the adventure was kind of just abruptly dropped on top of what's already there. So it just seems like a way to increase page count as opposed to actually incorporating the story elements. And that's kind of sad. I was kind of hoping for a little bit more out of it. But I'm not going to focus on too much of that. I don't want to give away too many spoilers. But I do want to say that I think that they tried to make it good, but I don't know. I feel kind of a mixed feeling about it. And I'm almost... I want to say if I had to put a number on it, I'd give it a 6 out of 10. I mean, they did provide a new map for the Goblin encounter, so that's cool. I like that, but I really didn't need to have the first part of it rewritten, and I think they did it based off of feedback from the past. I'm not sure, but it just seems really, really toned down. It doesn't feel natural, and it just feels kind of broken. And if you've played the original, it'll probably be a little disappointing or even annoying, because they've changed up the way that the first encounter goes. And I'm going to go over that part and the differences on that, just to give you an idea of how they rewrote this. But I don't know. This is kind of a strange thing. I'm kind of at odds with this. I don't know what to say, but here we go. So anyways, so I have the first encounter set up here, essentially. I'm using the Syrinscape player, and I noticed that Syrinscape kind of just switched their title. Instead of creating a new sound set, I think what they did is they copied over the Lost Mine of Phandelver, and they just changed the title around, which could be good, because if you change everything, then that would break the immersion for the module that they already had set up. So that part of it is probably good, but they probably added stuff to it, to the sound set. So nonetheless, there is some changes on the Syrinscape website. So if you go over there and you look for Lost Mine, it'll say the Shattered Obelisk, and so they changed some of the titling around. I don't know how much they added to the sound set, but it's still kind of compatible with what was there before. So if you've invested in the Lost Mine of Phandelver Syrinscape sounds, I'm pretty sure that should work. I'm not positive, but so far it seems to be working pretty good. So the real thing that I want to go into today are the differences between the first encounter and some of the things that have changed in just that first chapter. So what they've done is they've stripped out some of the things that were part of the starter set. So if you think about this product is no longer a starter set. It's a campaign. So with that in mind, you might still want to keep some of the assets from the original adventure, because it definitely lends itself when it comes to resources. So for instance, you used to get the pre-generated characters with the adventure. So if I go to the adventure and I click on the original, there's a pre-gen section that you can open up, and then these can be added to your campaign, and that's what I have over here in the combat tracker. So you add these, then you go over to the character manager, you know, you pick your portraits, and then you look them over and then add them to the combat tracker, and your players can choose those, so you don't have to spend, you know, 2 to 4 hours creating characters. But in the Lost Mine of or the new Phandelver and Below, there are no pre-gens. So you're getting that in the original adventure. So if you want to use the pre-gens from the original adventure, you have to have a copy of that, or find the characters or something like that. So I use the characters out of the original so I can illustrate some of the changes. So that's one thing I noticed right off the bat. And the other is the actual first encounter with the Goblin ambush. So this is the ambush that comes up after you leave Neverwinter or wherever you originate from. And when you're along the Tribord Trail, you come across some goblins and they attack you. But the way it's written is quite different, to be honest. They've kind of pulled the punches on this one. So they took out the element of rolling for surprise and ambush. And then they also changed the fact that the horses are no longer dead, that they're just alive and grazing around along the road. I don't have a problem with that, but then when I started thinking about it, it's like, okay, so for a person who's already played this, they can decide if they're going to pull the punches or not. I don't think that Wizards of the Coast had to do that. Maybe they were concerned that the subject matter might be too strong or harsh for a first-time group. But a majority of the user base has already played the adventure, so I don't know if that was a good move or not. But they essentially took the element of surprise out of there, and they rewrote it to say that when the players come to this area, instead of it being a shock or surprise, now it's, okay, there's 2 horses there, they're apparently abandoned, they're grazing along the road. So that hasn't changed in that regard, except for that they're alive. And then when you get there, there's obvious signs of a struggle. Maybe there's some ruts in the ground or whatever, and some drag marks. So they kind of took that away. So if you want to investigate the scene, you don't have those, you know, the subtleties there as much as you did in the first one. And then to top that off, they changed the fact that they just changed everything. Like, now you add the burden of having 2 horses. So that can work both ways. It can be a good thing. It can help carry their equipment, like when they leave to go to Phandalin. But you're kind of stuck bringing them with you or tying them up somewhere along the way while you go investigate where the goblins are. Or if you go straight to Phandalin, then you're going to bring the horses with you. They can help carry your stuff, fine. But it just adds like another burden to the GM and the players, especially if you're new. So if you're new, you don't want to have to manage other things, other resources. So I kind of have mixed feelings about it. Like, personally, I don't mind the horses being alive. I think it's cool, whatever. You know, I can make them dead if I want. But for someone brand new, I don't know if that's a good move to have them alive, because now the players are going to be distracted and concerned about the safety and what they're going to do with the horses, if they're going to sell them, that sort of thing. Or it's just going to be a pack mule where they're going to put all their stuff on the horses and just use those to carry all their stuff. So it's not a horrible thing, but it just seems very odd that they changed that part of it. I don't know what the thinking was, but I have my opinions as to why they did it, but I'm not going to air that live. But I'm not sure if I would have changed that. So leaving the horses dead, and then also, you know, the clues weren't as apparent in the original. I think that made that more mysterious and scary, kind of fun, as opposed to taking that away. And if you're new to the adventure, you're not going to know, you know, or new to the game, you're not going to know all those little subtleties. So it kind of ruins it for people who have played it, and it kind of changes it for people that are just going to start playing D&D. So I don't know. It can take a good adventure and kind of make it mediocre, and that's kind of what I felt like they did, at least with this part of it. And the other thing I noticed is they changed the very beginning. They did change around the focus on how to incorporate the players into the adventure. So you still suggested to start Neverwinter. They give you a little bit more information on how the characters might be connected to Gundren. They kind of mention something about transportation, and then they go into like how the players might know the region and how they're kind of connected. And they kind of give you some ideas like factions, like your players might be affiliated with the Harpers or affiliated with the Lord's Alliance on top of what's already given to you. And they did include the background, so at least for character creation, when you're building your player characters, instead of having the pre-gens, they give you all those backgrounds from each one of those pre-gens, and you can use those as your own background if you want when you're making characters for this. So you still have to build characters, but you do have some background tie-ins in case your player is localized, and I highly doubt anyone's going to do that. If they're already going to have to build their own character, they're just going to do their own thing. I don't think they're going to incorporate the story as much. The pre-gens kind of force that on you, but the fact that players are now going to be building their own characters, I don't know if it's going to be. It depends on the session 0, you know, what everyone discusses and agrees on. But you're not going to have the pre-gens so much. You'll just be having the actual backgrounds, and then you'll make your own characters. So I kind of have mixed feelings about that. I think that taking away the 3-hour setup is kind of a bad thing or a good thing, but at the same time, now they've added that back in with the latest iteration of this. So I don't know if that's good or not. It just seems very strange on the changes they made, the decisions. It's almost like the people who made the changes never run the adventure, so it's kind of weird. But I don't know. It just seems like they took customer feedback, but they didn't translate it well or something. I don't know. But I do like that they included an official map. That was sorely missed. But now that it's gone on for so long, there's so many alternatives out there. So many different map creators that have kind of made a living off this sort of thing. So now you're taking that away from the community when all along there wasn't a map until they decide to redesign the adventure and put it back out with another adventure stacked on top of it. So now you got where less people are going to be making this. Maybe they'll change the map they have to have the horses upright instead of laying down, but nonetheless, I mean, it's really strange. When I first saw this map, I was like, okay, this is a Mike Schley map, right? I'm like, did they make a mistake? I mean, are these supposed to be dead or what? And I went and actually looked at the adventure, and I'm like, oh, gee, they changed the horses around. The horses are not dead. And then the other thing they did is they stripped out some of the new GM notes. So I wasn't happy about that, because this is no longer a beginner adventure for a new GM. This is a full-on campaign. So they decided to drop a lot of that stuff. So all the notes and the little cues that you had for running the adventure and that sort of thing have been removed out and replaced with their own little changes. So I don't know. I just feel like the starter set was a good intro into Fantasy Grounds or into Dungeons and Dragons, and now they've taken that away. And if you want to experience that, now you got to buy another product or backtrack if you didn't know about it and buy the old adventure just so you can get other assets and help to run the adventure. So if you've never purchased anything and you started off with this adventure, and then you go, oh, there's a box set, there's a previous adventure. I don't think they even mention that in here. Let me see something here. Do they even say that? Let's see. Welcome to Phandelver. Okay, it just gives you some lore. And then it talks about the threats from below. So they immediately bring in some lore about the adventure, especially the latter parts, like Chapter 8. They discuss Mind Flayer activity. It's optimized for 4 to 6 characters. It presents Phandelver, the surrounding region, and the Underdark. So it's kind of setting it up as a base of operations, so I get that. Fantasy Grounds mentions that there's a reference manual and that there's no story entries. So if you're used to the story entries, the move from story entries to the reference manual is happening. So if you haven't played in a while, the adventures are now being presented through the story, through the reference manual instead. All the maps presented are combined battle maps and DM maps. So the DM information and such has like room numbers and locations. So on this map here, I'm going to unlock this. And I'm going to turn off the player preview. So it has these labels on here, but only I can see those as a GM. So over here in the layer tool, it's DM only, and you can also just completely shut them off. But if you leave it on DM only, you're the only one who's going to see these labels. All the rest of that stuff is not visible to the party. So that's how they're doing these now, is they're actually including the locations and the arrows, and anything that's related to the map that's not player facing is going to be on a separate layer. So that way you don't have to have 2 maps anymore. You just have one map with all the numbers layered on top. So you just turn off or turn on the DM only part, and that's basically if you leave it at DM only, it'll work fine. But you can also turn them off altogether if it's distracting for you as a game master. Yeah, that part's cool, to be able to turn on or off the labels. And that way you don't have 50 gazillion maps. So if you had a rule set or some kind of big campaign, it cuts the maps in half. So that makes it a lot less robust. But anyway, so that's something that they've changed for the better, I guess, in Fantasy Grounds anyways. And then it'll say some of the maps have further hidden and visible layers. Full instructions on the purpose of these layers and how to use them is given at the appropriate place in the adventure. So they've done pretty good there. Extensive use has been made of quests in order for the guide to DM and players through an adventure. In addition to real quests, the quest system has been used to easily give out information, clues, and background details about which the players can collect and use. Most have links to the relevant pages. So what they're talking about is these quest items. And then if you go to the Shattered Obelisk, you have all these different quest items, and it gives you the links of what they are linked to. So I like that. That's really cool. So that's kind of a useful tool, actually, for a virtual tabletop. You won't see that in a traditional tabletop thing. So that's pretty cool. Let's see what else. So that's kind of the Fantasy Grounds stuff. I mean, they didn't change much there. They just let you know how it flows and that sort of thing. But when you go through and read this first chapter and compare it with the other, so I'm going to bring that up. So I got the reference manual for the new adventure for the Shattered Obelisk, and then I have the original. So this is the differences that you're going to notice between the original and the new adventure. So they are obviously totally different as far as approach goes. So they're not even close to being the same in what they're trying to do with the adventure. So I'm not sure if I like it or not, but it is what it is. So now you have, here's the part 1 for the Goblin Arrows in the original. And the way this is broken down is, let's go with just the Goblin Ambush. So here's the road to Phandelver and this is the goblin arrows, which is basically the same thing. Let's see. Let me expand this out so I can see what's going on here. Yeah, so the road to Phandelver, this is kind of like in the City of Neverwinter. A dwarf named Gundren asks you to bring a wagon load. This one says, this new one says, you begin your adventuring career in the City of Neverwinter. A dwarf named Gundren Rockseeker hired you to bring a wagon load of provisions. So it changed a little bit there. And then it says here for the original, before continuing with the adventure, do the following. Encourage the players to introduce each other in character that haven't already done so. Ask them to start thinking about how their characters came to know the dwarf. And then this one, it totally cut that out. So there's no DM prompting here to help new DMs play. So they took out a lot of that excess stuff. I guess they probably considered this excess. And then they left the wagon part, so that makes sense. But when you're ready to continue, it says go to the goblin section, and this one doesn't. So I don't know. It's kind of weird. So they took the DM stuff out, and they did. They were talking about marching order and all this stuff for the starter set, but for the rehash or reuse, they didn't. So now you got the goblin ambush. So let's take a look at that. So in a nutshell, it looks kind of the same. I mean, you got the same image, although this image is a lot bigger. So that's cool. I like the fact that they provided more of the image instead of cutting it off. It may have been a page thing or page count thing originally. I don't know. Several hours after you go onto the road, you're introduced, they reach map 1.1, read the encounter. So I think, okay, so here's the difference. So you've been on the Tribor Trail for about half a day, and you're nearing a side road leading south towards Phandelver. As you come around a bend, you stumble upon the scene of a recent battle. The woods press close to the trail here, with a steep embankment and dense thicket on either side. Two horses wander the road, sniffing at ransacked personal effects. So there's that, okay? And then the other one says, you've been on the Tribor Trail for about half a day. Now, this is the original one. As you come around the bend, you spot two dead horses sprawled about 50 feet ahead of you, blocking the path. Each has several black feathered arrows sticking out of it. The woods press close to the trail here, with a steep embankment and dense thicket on either side. So they changed that, and I don't know what the point was in that, other than maybe to tone it down so it's not too gruesome, like animal cruelty or something. I don't know, but I think that was kind of a weird move. I don't think it was necessary. I think they could have left it the way it was and moved on. But now they talk about the site is littered with arrows. There's scrap of fabric, odds and ends discarded from Gundren's bags when the goblins were looking for the map. Now that part makes sense because the other one doesn't give you any of that. So if you're using Meet Me in Phandelver Adventure hook, the players can recognize the horses, blah, blah, blah. It's up to the players to decide whether to bring the horses with them. When the characters inspect the scene closer, read the following. So this is what I was getting at earlier, is this adds burden to the DM and to the players to add these horses in, because it's essentially like adding NPCs. So this is your first adventure. It's going to suck because you may not want to deal with the horses as a GM, and it can be distracting. But on the player side of this, it can be cool because you're going to be having a way to carry stuff. But then you have to manage the horses, and it just depends on how the GM runs the table. But if it was me, they would have to at least put them in a, some sort of boarding, and then maybe even pay for it, or maybe they'll get it free. Maybe they'll be comped because they helped out or something. But nonetheless, you have this burden of two horses. You can always have them sell them too if they don't want to keep messing with them. But I think that just adds more complexity to the where it's unnecessary. I don't know if that was a good move or not, but really depends on how the GM kind of runs this. And I think it's I don't know. I kind of have mixed feelings about it. So, anyways. So they talk about the goblins hiding after they investigate the saddlebags, which is normal. Here's the encounter for Fantasy Grounds. They're both the same, pretty much. Yeah, almost exactly the same. So that hasn't changed. The goblins will fight to the death until one goblin remains alive. That goblin then flees and heads for the goblin trail. This one says that the original says 4 goblins are hiding in the road, 2 to each side of the road. So they don't kind of, 2 on either side of the road. I don't know. It seems kind of the same. Let's see. So now it tells you to review the stat block, check to see if anyone's surprised, use the initiative rolls. When the time comes to act, 2 of them rush forward. See, I don't know if it's giving you quite the same thing here. It says, in the unlikely events that the goblins triumph, they leave the characters unconscious. So they totally cut this part out about how to run the encounter. So I don't know. But this had links to the surprise and to combat. So obviously this module or this new adventure is not designed for new DMs. So they kind of cut out that starter set stuff, and they kind of went straight into the adventure instead. So I guess they were trying to trim out some of the stuff, and maybe this encounter was being rebalanced for the adventure, because it is kind of a risky encounter. Your first go around, you could actually die. It was so well balanced that with the pre-gens that it was like 50-50 almost, or maybe 60-40. So it was kind of a tough fight, but I kind of want to be able to pull the punches myself. So I don't know. I'll run it the way that they designed it, but I don't know if I like the changes. I almost wish I had never saw the original, because now I'm thinking, oh, there's this, and then you go, oh, wait, they changed that. So anything that you knew from before is still okay, but it's going to be changed a little bit. And a lot of the nuances in between the chapters is removed, so they took that out. And this gets into resting, like if you want to rest or not. And this one just kind of gets more in depth on the potential for surviving. So it looks like they kind of want the goblin to survive more, and the other one is like, well, if they survive, then do this. So I don't know. I kind of like the surviving goblin thing, but again, that adds another burden to the game. So you're adding another NPC, and then you're also adding the fact that, you might have to manage it, but it does open more roleplay opportunities. So role-playing with an NPC goblin could be a lot of fun. It just depends on how much time you have and what you're willing to roleplay. So kind of depends on the table in that case. So I kind of like the surviving goblin, but some people don't. They don't want to deal with another NPC on the combat tracker. So that's kind of up to the GM and the players to kind of manage that. But it seems like Phandelver and Below are leaning more towards letting the guy survive, whereas the older one is more like 50-50, they're probably assuming murder hobo type thing. So this one talks about rests, and then it goes into the Goblin Trail. This one kind of goes straight to the Goblin Trail, and then what the Cragmaws or the Cragmaw goblins will know. So this is kind of the difference between the two. Is more or less the older one was more set up around GMs. And this one is just a plain campaign. So take your pick on how you want to do it. Honestly, I would just run this thing with the old one, and then incorporate some of the new stuff and call it good. I don't know if I would run this from A to Z, because when you get to Chapter 5, I'm not going to give away too many spoilers, but just for instance, I'm just going to give you this first part here. It says, when the characters return to Phandalin after their adventures in Wave Echo Cave, which is towards the end of the original, they find the town in upheaval. So the town of Phandalin is now in upheaval. Thievery, vandalism, and violence plague Phandalin. all perpetrated by a band of goblins, some displaying strange psionic powers. The goblins have been pursuing their goal in the background of the previous chapters, so see the goblin story below, and their efforts have now become the adventure's main story. So the town is in distress, it's becoming corrupted, and these goblins are kind of raiding and making things kind of unfun. So I don't know how long after the original adventure should this happen. It seems like night and day. Like, you go do this adventure, maybe you're gone a week, you come back and all this hell broke loose. It just seems like a really lame way to incorporate the changes that are coming and the influence. I think I would have probably started that sooner than later. So I might have, used the goblins so that they're not a whole completely different group of goblins. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't, I agree with you, Bane. So some light sprinkling of hints of the greater story after Lost. Yeah, but it just seems like a real lame way to justify it. I think that could have been done a lot cleaner and a lot more story kind of oriented, and kind of make it more like maybe Sildar had a missive or a message from his organization that said that there is a something going on in the region. I want you to check it out. And then the players talk to him, and he's like, "Yeah, there's more going on than we thought." And just something. It just seems like a really lame way to bring this in, because it's almost like you come back from one thing and now you got a bigger problem. It's not like there's not much reprieve in there, not a whole lot of build up there. The other issues you have is correlating the necessary changes. Yeah, exactly. This is difficult to do when you've already run it too. So cosmetically changing random that's tough. So it talks about running this chapter when it really should say, yeah, I hear you. This should say running this adventure, because it's really different. It says it's divided into two parts. You investigate around Phandelver and the hunt for Ruxathid. And Ruxathid wasn't really mentioned much. I think that I don't care about if you're running it straight through. That's fine. I can stick with the things when they stay the same. Yeah, I hear you. The goblins left 4 distinct crime scenes that the characters get to investigate. So, who is Ruxathid? So pursuing him takes the characters to Zorzola's Rest, which is in the Underdark, I believe. There's a traditional dungeon crawl. It's filled with... See, if that was just this part, just a whole separate adventure, I think I can deal with it more. But when you plop this on top of another adventure and then tie it in so weakly, it just seems really more like a page count thing than anything else. I really think they could have released this separately. And it would have been up to us to incorporate how the story is... how it unfolds, because this is kind of like, oh, here's this adventure and now we're going to dump this other one on top of it, and here's the tie-in, which is like a little investigation around Phandelver right after you get back from a big adventure as it is. So it just seems kind of, I don't know, kind of hokey. Like there's no, like I said, there's no tie-in. There's no real continuity here. It's just kind of like one adventure on top of another. And other YouTubers and people that have reviewed this have said kind of similar things. They're kind of, and I'm not siding with them, but I think that it could really be done a lot cleaner. That's all I'm saying. It's not horrible, but it's not great. So like I said earlier, my take is like a 6 out of 10. I don't give it much more than that. I think it's okay. I think if I ran this, I would just run the original adventure and then run this separately. I don't know if I'd do the whole thing through the way they wrote it. So characters gain a level if they discover this area. The characters gain a level if they defeat Ruxathid. So I don't know. Just put a lot. Yeah, it does. It does put a lot of work on it, but if they're gonna insert how to mesh these together, then make it good. You know, if I already had to put the work in anyways, I mean, I don't know. I just think making it good would have been a lot more important than just making more pages. You know, because that, I don't know, it just seems like I would have totally rewrote this whole thing. I don't think I would have dumped it on top of Lost Mine. I really don't. Because you're starting off at roughly 5th level, so they could have used this as a medium tier adventure that could be used, like this first part where they're investigating the town, that could have been used in Adventure League, and, you know, kind of gone there in their more traditional steps. I want to say that whoever bought this off as good or as acceptable probably needs to be replaced, because this is not at all what I expected. And from what I can tell, it doesn't look like the community is responding very well either. And I don't necessarily subscribe to other people's opinions, but from a GM standpoint, it's not great. It's kind of okay. You know, it's get more assets and you got a new map and, you know, you got some other areas to go, but, you know, what do you do when you've already run through it? And then your next adventure was the, what was that, Tyranny of Dragons was the one that most people did after this. So why didn't they just kind of give us those? Like, maybe go run the Tyranny of Dragons and come back to Phandelver and just make it a higher level tier 3 adventure or something. I mean, that would have made a lot more sense to me, because this stuff here, being that it's all horror and it's kind of weird and esoteric, I think that this would have made more sense to play later on in the career. Yeah, exactly. I think that with this, dropping this to return back to Phandelver from one of those adventures would have made a hell of a lot more sense than just stacking it on top of Lost Mine, because it you know, this could have easily been changed to a level 10 to, you know, or a high level tier, which is what a lot of people want, right? There's not a lot of high level adventures. So I think this would have been way cooler if it would have been released as a return to Phandelver instead of, you know, Lost Mine and then this. You know, that doesn't make any sense. So it would have been way cooler at a higher level with the same kind of vibe. I don't mind the horror elements. I think all that's kind of cool. I like mind flayers and stuff, but honestly, it seems over the top for the beginner set and then to this. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And then they took away the beginner stuff, so now it's just a campaign. It's rather, you know, cliche. It doesn't have the same kind of vibe, not at all. So if you are watching later on, you know, I don't, you have your own opinions about that, that's fine. I'm just not too happy with it. And to top it off, I think I would run it after Rise of Tiamat or Storm Kings of Thunder or something like that, and then just boost the levels up. Because then I'd say, oh, okay, we're going to go back to Phandelver, which kind of brings you back home, you know, and that's kind of where you started. And I think that's a way cooler way to wrap up a storyline than to... because, you know, those things that are going on in the Far Realms may have some kind of indirect influence or a tie-in with one of those other big adventures. Maybe the Far Realm is doing something that is provoking the Rise of Tiamat or the Storm Kings of Thunder or the Storm Lord's Wrath or whatever, you know. I think that would have made a much more cleaner approach. So if I was the design person at Wizards of the Coast, I would say absolutely not. We're going to run this as a tier 3 adventure, and we're going to tie this in. We're going to spend some time figuring out how to segue this adventure in from all the other releases, including all the way up to, I want to say, probably the Rime of the Frost Maiden. All of those could have been played and then go back to Phandelver, you know, or something like that. Or you know, spend a whole chapter or a whole section on how to tie these things in with the previous settings and such. Because that would have made a lot more sense. There would be a lot more continuity, and there would be a ton more assets by that time. So it's kind of like they took a level or a low tier, dumped a high tier on top of it, and then lowered the levels on it. That's what it feels like, kind of. Or basically you were cooking on the grill, and I use this analogy. You're cooking on the grill, you got some shrimp on the barbie. Someone throws down some hamburger and says, hey, we're going to have steak. And I don't think that's what we're getting here. I think we're getting hamburger thrown in with the shrimp on the grill. That doesn't mix. So that's kind of how I feel about this adventure. It kind of feels weird, like it's kind of convoluted or something. I don't know. There's just something not right about how it flows, and it just feels like whoever bought off on this was like, yeah, go ahead. You know, it doesn't feel like there was much thought put into how this might roll out in the grand scheme. Yeah, it's a fairly beloved adventure to start with. Yeah, exactly. Don't ruin it, you know, and they've done that. They've systematically come here and they just dump the hamburger on the grill with the shrimp, you know, and it's just not working. It just feels horrible. And the only reason I use that analogy because it's kind of like, you know, yeah, it's meat, but it isn't steak. That's ground beef, you know, that's not the same thing. So I don't know. I just feel like for someone who's never ran Lost Mine of Phandelver, they're gonna be okay. It's not gonna be too bad. I mean, it is what it is, right? It's just a campaign. But they basically did the same thing with the multitude releases of Tyranny of Dragons, releasing Horde of the Dragon Queen, and yeah. And the other thing that I'm kind of not too keen about, and I don't want to get too far off our topic because we are talking about the new adventure, but it's like they released like the Big Beast thing. Why wasn't that around during the Storm Kings of Thunder, right? I mean, that doesn't make any sense to have a whole giant thing when you've already had pretty much a whole campaign centered around it. Just doesn't make any sense. And now they're coming out with a dragon book that's more for like reading and for younger people, but they've already done the dragon trope. I really wish they would. Yeah, not meaning to cite. Yeah, that's no problem. We're starting to get into you know, random territory, but I just wanted to let you know some of the initial changes. I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but my advice or my opinion, and you don't have to like it or not, but basically I give it a 6 out of 10. I think if you run this separately and you've never run an adventure before, it's okay. Or I wouldn't be a starter GM running it though. And on top of that, if you really want to truly experience Lost Mine, I think the classic adventure does a lot better job helping new GMs. And the changes I think that they made in the original parts were kind of unnecessary. I don't think it was needed. And the changes that were made were kind of strange to me. I didn't quite understand, other than maybe trying to balance the encounter a little more and kind of leave it less to fate. But I kind of like that risky die roll thing where it's kind of 50-50, but I guess they don't want you to kill off the adventurers right off the bat. So, but I don't know. And then leaving the horses alive, I'm okay with that. It's just that I would have liked to have that agency myself. I could have easily just said, okay, these horses are not dead. They are alive and grazing along the road. You know, I don't need the Wizards of the Coast to do that part for me. But as far as like the other adventure or the other half of this thing, I don't know. Would have made more sense to release it as a separate adventure and drop it after the other campaigns. So maybe start it at level 12 or something like that. I don't know. But anyways, guys, so I'm going to be trying to run this adventure on Start Playing. I have a paid game out there. I don't want to get into advertising that too much, but I had 2 people sign up in the last 3 weeks. So that's telling me that it's not a good sign to me. And I've done social media advertising and everything else. So I'm wondering if it's still part of the backlash from the previous problems that happened earlier this year, or maybe I'm just a shitty GM or whatever. But whatever it is, there's not a whole lot of people interested right now. And I just feel like that's kind of true with most of the content that's coming from Wizards of the Coast. So I don't know. I like Big Beast, but I think it was too late. And I think that this adventure here is a little over the top for a new GM. So if you're new, you might want to play the original first. And the other thing is that the tie-in with the rest of what's been going on doesn't really make sense. So anyhow, I think I'll call it. I think I've done enough complaining and some of the stuff, but the review part of just the first part of it reveals that the horses aren't dead. They changed the way that they laid out for the GM. They're just less GM notes, and they've kind of leaned more towards having one of the goblins survive and take you to the next part of the goblin hideout. And it just seems like very railroaded too. A lot less flexibility in some of these elements that they presented. So I don't know. I don't say I hate it, but it isn't my favorite. So 6 out of 10 at the most. Take it or leave it. So that's what I got for you today. Take care, everyone. You have a good week. Tomorrow's Friday, and I will be doing more. Yeah, it's a good conversation for folks who have run. Yeah, exactly. Yep, I agree. Let's see. So the main thing, though, is I am going to run this. I'm going to provide my own maps because I'm not too keen with the Mike Schley stuff. It's painted. It looks nice, but it's not good for virtual tabletop. And so I'm tired of Schley. I'm tired of Dyson logos and all those other artists. I want some real digital maps that can be used for virtual tabletop. I don't know why the publishers aren't doing it. The third-party guys are, but the main people are just using this old kind of printed map or, poster map. They're not really making this for virtual tabletop, and now that they are going to make their own, now it makes total sense. So anyways, take care, folks. Have a good day. And yeah, they're only sticking with you can only use what we put in the books. Yeah, sort of, isn't it? Yep. All right, guys, we will see you around. And like I said, there's no pre-gen, so you're going to have to make characters.